welcome back. We are going to be focusing on the hip flexors today. So our hip flexor muscles, our iliacus, our psoas, they are two muscles in the body that cross kind of the hip region. They come down the front of the leg, right with the quads. They come up and over this hip bone area, and then they attach into our low spine. So when you roll quads, right, you're going to affect your hip flexor a little bit. When you roll your low back, you're going to get into your hip flexors a little bit. So this video is going to be a little bit shorter. We're just going to pinpoint kind of the trigger point area of the hip flexor as it crosses over this hip joint. So that's going to be where our focus is today. We are only going to stretch our hip flexors at the end. So we're not going to do a test and retest in this section, but you could. You could do the stretches before and the stretches after. We're just, for the purposes of this, going to do the stretches afterwards. So a couple of things that you're going to want for your hip flexors. You can use your hands. So if you don't have any equipment, your hands will work really great. Otherwise, I use one ball because it is a small area. I typically use the small ball, but you could use a bigger ball as well. It's a little harder to get into the hip flexor with, say, a foam roller because it's a bigger piece. It's going to come over the hip bone, and then that may not feel good on the hip bone. You could do some gua shawing of the area. I'm not going to do that because, you know, our hip, the area that we're going to be working that's just more something that you want to do not on video, right, to get into that area of your body. But the ball works great. Also, the way our body is made, so we're going to lay on our belly. You could do this on the wall. It's a little bit harder. Or if you're using your hands, you could lay on your back. But when we lay on our belly to massage into the ball, kind of the shape of our body makes it a little difficult perhaps to feel the ball get into the muscle tissue that we want it to get into. So a yoga block can come in handy. If you don't have a yoga block, a couple of books. I often say Harry Potter books, right, because they're kind of thick. You take one or two Harry Potter books, you've got a yoga block. All right, so we're gonna get into the hip flexors. 5 minutes usually is max what I spend on my hip flexors. This is an area of my body I tend to stay 2 to 5 minutes. One, because I'm usually pretty tender in the area that we're going to get into today. 2, because it is a very small area. We're not really going to do much rolling. It's going to be more of a little pin and a little shift. So to find the area that we're working on, if you come into your hip bone, right, your bony part of your hip that you can feel right here, and then we're just going to come right inside the hip bone. It's like so here is, if this is like your hip bone, it's like we're going to massage along the inside of the bone, and then about an inch or 2 out. So if you took your belly button and your hip bone, a little bit closer to the hip bone than the belly button, but coming up into the angle. So this area right here is what we're going to get into. Now, if you're not using the ball today, you can sit, you can stand, or lying down seems to work really well. You can use your thumb, take your thumb inside that hip bone area, and then those couple of inches over, you could use the fingers as well, and get that massage there. Now that's a lot less intense, so depending on how tight you are, you may want to give that a try. Or, again, this is a little bit intense. We're going to take the block, lay the ball on top of the block, but what I'm going to do is I will be bringing this area of my hip bone onto the ball. So sometimes I just take the ball, I put it in place as I get ready to then place the ball on the yoga block and hinge over. I'm coming right inside the bone and a little shifting. Now, if you're like, I just don't feel comfortable doing this, right? It doesn't feel right, I'm scared I'm not in the right place, then my advice is don't do this part yet. right? Because you are gonna get into your hip flexor when you massage your quads. You are gonna get into your hip flexor when you're working your low back as well. So don't do anything you don't feel comfortable with. So if you're like, oh man, I feel like I'm like, stabbing myself in the stomach, punching myself in the gut, like nothing feels good about this, then don't do this part. Right? Work another part because our bodies are connected. We're gonna get some loosening here, even if we're not focusing into this particular spot. And so you can see I'm not doing a lot of moving here. I shift a little. It is pretty intense, but I can breathe, I can talk. I don't feel like I have sharp pain. But I also usually only spend, a few minutes at a time. And we'll show you on the wall in a moment. Again, it's not going to be as intense, but you can use the wall. Get just a little bit of movement, but for the most part, I'm staying kind of steady. And I'm just shifting. Nice. I really can feel a bit of difference, and then I'm going to do the other side. So again, I could also just take the ball, right, and kind of massage in here. That's going to be way milder. Or I place the ball in place right inside the bone. Down over. And you can do that gua sha. Right? So you can get your gua sha, your scraping tool. I would use a gua sha tool rather than say the Graston or the wrench type in this method, just because it's smaller and so it'd be easier to get right inside the bone. And remember, you just kind of put a little lotion on and kind of scrape, lightly massaging those outer layers. It's not going to get super deep. And breathe. Right, I just want to take some nice breaths here. A little bit of movement, not big movements at all. I'm not moving more than an inch in any direction. I'm mostly doing more just holding. Getting the body to release. And I really can feel a difference. I just felt some release right there on this hip. This one was bothering me earlier today. I do a lot of cycling, and so my hip flexors do get kind of tight, and I'll even feel it into my low back. If you sit a lot, your hip flexors are going to be like sit in a chair. Hip flexors are in that shortened position. Right, and then come on up. So if I did want to do this on a wall, I could, right, but I'm going to have to kind of bring the ball into the position, press into the wall, and then I kind of look to the side. The small ball is a little bit hard, it's a little bit too small, so I would most likely use the bigger ball because it's going to come out away from the wall more. But this is a lot less intense. So this is a great way to get some lighter massaging into that hip area. And I have quite a bit of control in my movement. I don't have to worry about it coming off of a block. The small ball works, but a little bit bigger ball works better. Right, and I could do both sides here. Nice. So that's also an option for you as well. So again, not a super long time into those hip flexors, and then we do want to take some time and get a little stretching of them afterwards. One of my favorite stretches, and you may want to grab a little blanket or something to put under your knee, is to come into that runner's lunge. So bringing one knee forward, Placing my back knee onto that softer surface, and then lengthening up through my chest. My hands can stay on the ground. My hands could come onto a yoga block for a little bit more support, or maybe I start to rise up a little higher. Again, my hand could be on the yoga block for support, or whichever leg is back, I often then bring that arm up into the air. You could bring both arms also. There are other stretches, but this is one that I really, really like for hip flexor. If I wanted more, I could bend that back knee. I could even reach around and grab it maybe, but I don't want to cramp up my hamstring. And then release. And we'll do that on the other side, so our other side gets a nice stretch as well. Forward. In that position, hands can stay on the ground or the block, or whichever leg is back, maybe lifting that arm. Give some nice breaths. Maybe bending the knee, maybe reaching for it. So you can do a lot of different variations of this. You should be laying on your belly as well. Bow pose on your belly, half bow, great stretches. Release. And come on up and out. All right, thank you so much for joining me for this session. I will see you back here again soon.